sometimes it can happen that the metrics from K6 don't capture everything we need. Luckily, we can create our own metrics. So in this lecture, let me show you a few basics. There are 4 steps to creating a custom metric in K6. The first thing that we need to do is to import the metrics module. So the metrics module needs to be imported here. So I'm going to go ahead and write import. And then we're not sure exactly what we're going to import. So we're going to just write the 2 braces here. And I'm going to go ahead and write here from. And this will be K6/metrics. We can define a custom metric of one of the types supported by K6. And this is counter, gauge, rate, or trend. So when we want to import here something, we need to think in advance, like what kind of a metric are we going to create? In this case, let's begin by creating a counter. So I'm going to go ahead and import counter. Okay, this is the first step. Now, we actually need to initialize to create our new metric. So we're going to go ahead and typically here after the options, but outside of any function, we're going to go ahead and define our metric. So I'm going to define a simple counter metric, which I'm going to call my counter. So I'm going to define the variable my counter. And this is where we're going to create the metric. We're going to use the new keyword. And whatever type of a metric that we're using, in this case counter, we're going to write here new counter in this case. And then we're going to provide the name of the custom metric. And I'm just going to use here an underscore. I'm going to write my counter. So the second step is done. We have now created this counter. But to actually use it, we need to go in the default function. So now in the default function, this is when we decide to do something with this metric. Now, because this is a counter, it simply counts. So what we're going to do here is use the add method. So what we're going to do here is we're going to reference the variable my counter, which we have just defined here. We're going to say my counter dot add. We're going to invoke add method, and we're going to add 1. So we're counting 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this to see how it works and what is happening. So K6, run, and I'm going to use this file name custom metrics. All right, so let's take a look at the execution report. And what we're going to see here is my counter as a custom metric. Of course, this is not a very smart custom metric. It's just to demonstrate how to create it. Now, in this case, we have essentially just replicated the iterations, right? So we'll see here that my counter has the exact same value as the iterations because we have counted how often we went inside the default function. But in essence, this is how this should appear in the report. And of course, you can customize it to your own needs. Now, before we conclude this, there's still one thing that we can do with this custom metrics, and that is to define thresholds. So I already have here a threshold defined. So if I want to define the threshold for my counter, that's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to use the name that appears also here, my underscore counter. And this works exactly as any other metric. You need to know the type of the metric and which aggregation method to use. But apart from this, it works in a pretty similar way. So I'm going to write my counter column. And let's say that we expect the count to be greater than 10. So I'm going to write here count greater than 10. I'm going to save it and run it once again to see if we get a check mark near our custom metric. I'm going to see here my counter gets a check mark, which indicates that the threshold that we have defined has not been reached. There's one more thing you should know about this custom metrics, and that is the following. Sometimes you're creating a custom metric and you're creating some conditions when you're using that metric, when you're using essentially the add method here on the metric. And it may happen that no events occur. Or if the custom metric is not defined in the thresholds, it's sometimes possible that K6 will not display the custom metric in the report. So you're defining it there and then you're looking at the report and you're not seeing it. So typically these are the reasons why this is happening. So either no events have occurred, so the add method that we have here hasn't been called, or you have forgotten to add it to the thresholds, which is obviously something that you should consider doing.